In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use the audio editing program called Audacity to create a very simple podcast. The instructional design context for this particular tutorial is very simple. I am going to pretend that I am an instructional technology instructor, imagine that, and I want to teach my students about the worldwide phenomenon called Hour of Code. If you haven't heard of Hour of Code, it's very exciting. It's sponsored by a nonprofit organization called code.org, and it's designed to introduce and invite and recruit new students to learn how to code programming. In other words, how to create software programs. And this is very exciting. So what I've got in this particular podcast is a series of clips that I've either recorded or imported, and I've arranged in what we call an audio composition. And Audacity uses a timeline interface, very similar to video editing applications. Over here on the left-hand side, it starts at time 0, and it goes out here to whatever time you're zoomed out at. You have magnifying glasses here that allow you to zoom out and zoom in to appropriate levels so that you can see all of your assets arranged. So it moves from left to right in time, but you also have this vertical aspect to all of this stuff. And what does that mean? Well, each one of these areas is called a track. So I've got a track here for my music. I've got a track here for the first narration segment called Talk 1. Then I have an actual imported clip called Partovi, and I'll explain that in a moment. Then another narration clip called Talk 2. Then another imported clip from Bill Gates. And then that's it. This last audio track down here is totally blank. So the first thing I want you to understand about the Audacity interface is that it's left to right as a timeline, and it's up and down as a series of layers, or what we call tracks. It's just like Photoshop, where you have different layers of assets that are stacked one on top of each other. So I have my first one here, my second one here, my third one, fourth one, and fifth one. And there's no rule that says you have to put each one on its own individual track. I could have combined these on multiple tracks if I really wanted to. But for teaching purposes, I think it's easier for us to understand if we put every introductory element at least on its own individual track. We can combine them later, and I'll certainly show you how to do that. So playing back from left to right, just listen to what this podcast sounds like, and notice that it's going to end at about 60 seconds, and it's nowhere near complete. There's a lot more information that you would want to have in a podcast about Hour of Code, but I just don't have time to do it for this particular assignment. So this is just a snippet, and that's totally deliberate, and it's okay for you to truncate your assignment here at the 60-second or earlier mark, because otherwise it's going to get just too big. Again, we're trying to learn the tool here within the context of creating some type of meaningful audio learning object. So with that said, let me just press play, and I want you to hear this, and I want you to watch the playhead as it goes from left to right through each one of these media elements here, these audio elements as they play. Welcome back to the Joe Show, everyone. Today's episode will focus on Hour of Code. That's the global phenomenon designed to introduce young students to the science of computer programming. To start us off, I want to play a clip from a recent TED Talk by Hadi Partovi. He's the founder of code.org. That's the group that evangelizes the Hour of Code movement.
Computers are changing everything, yet most schools don't teach computer science.
So that's the fundamental problem and the real reason he started Hour of Code, to create interest in teaching students how to write software programs. But what is a computer program anyway? For that answer, let's listen to perhaps one of the most qualified experts in the world. Here's Bill Gates.
And so a computer program really is a little bit of math and some if statements where the decision gets made.
You know, you can think of this as a multimedia linear essay where you have from left to right various things playing back in real time. However, there is a sequence to this story. There's a little bit of music, then there's some talk, then there's a quote, then there's some more talk, then there's another quote. And that sounds very similar to what or how students might actually write a research paper. They make a statement, they insert a citation, They make some more statements, they insert more citations. And so this is a wonderful way, podcasting or creating audio learning objects is a wonderful way to kind of appropriate what we do in the written medium to audio storytelling. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a real quick tour of some of the different tools that are available here. You already know about the timeline going left to right, and you already know about these tracks top to bottom here. But what you may not know is that we can name each individual track and we can move them. This is exactly like Photoshop. You can assign a name to a Photoshop layer, you can assign a name to an Audacity layer or an Audacity track, and you can move them around. For example, this music intro, if I were to click on that pull-down menu, I could choose name. It has a default name when I first record it or when I first import it, but I can select the name option here and just type in whatever name I want. And I can do that for each one of these tracks here. I can give it a unique name. I can always change it anytime that I want. I can also change the positioning. For example, if I came down here and I decided, I really want to talk first, then play a little bit of music, and then talk again. If that were the case, and I wanted to keep everything top to bottom in that order, I could simply go to the Talk 1 track and tell it to move the track up. And you can see how they flip positions here. I'm going to undo that just so I can go back to what we had. But the point is, all you have to do is click on these little pull-down menus and you can change the vertical stacking arrangement, what we call the Z-index, of each of these audio elements. You also have the ability to resize the height of these tracks. Do you see what I did there? All I did was take my mouse and position it right on top of the border between each track, and I can make it as tall or as short as I want. And this is sometimes helpful if you want to fill the page with just the number of tracks that you need so that you can maximize your editing efficiency. In this case, I don't really need that last audio track, so I'm just going to zoom it out of the way. And now I only see the tracks for which I have in runtime. A little bit about these tools. Up here on my main tool palette is my main tool palette. To the left of that, I have play controls. You know what those are. But the first tool I want to talk about is this selection tool. If I were to take a selection tool, I can highlight any piece of any track just like a word in a word processor. That's all it is. Think of it as highlighting. I highlight it, and if I wanted to hit the delete button, watch what happens. Boom, it's gone. I just cut it out. I could also have used the scissor tool. Boom, and I cut it out. So let me undo that to put it back where it was. And the point is, the selection tool allows me to select any piece of any track just as if it were a word or a sentence. Next to that, or actually let's go down to the bottom row here and let's talk about the time shift tool. The time shift tool is very important because this is what allows you to move content around horizontally in time so that you can get it layered exactly when you want it to start. And in this case, I think I need to come over just a little bit more right about there. Something like, no, I want it a little bit more right there. And that allows me then to have precise control over the timing of every single audio element in my composition. So that's what the time shift tool does. Don't worry about the multi-mode tool and don't worry about the draw tool. And the zoom tool does exactly what you would think it would do, but I actually prefer these magnifying glasses over here. They allow me to zoom in or zoom out as appropriate, so get used to using those. The other more complicated tool, but very practical, is the envelope tool, and I'll show you how to use that here shortly. But first, I think this is enough to get started. We now know enough to, I think, to be dangerous. So let me switch over and start an absolute blank file and show you how we actually begin the composition process. So I've got nothing here, and I know that I need to record some narration, and I need to import some music, and I need to capture some quotations off of YouTube. In my head and on paper in front of me, I've sketched out what this design is supposed to be for this particular podcast, and those are the elements that I need. I also wrote my script, okay? So I'm ready to rock and roll. How do I start the recording process? Well, it's really, really easy. Now I've got my script in front of me, so I'm going to read just a few seconds worth here. I'm not going to do the whole thing because I don't want to waste your time, but I think you'll get the point. To start a recording, all I do is click the record button and start talking, which is exactly what I'll do. I'll click it now. Welcome back to the Joe Show, everyone. Today's episode will focus on Hour of Code. And then when I'm done recording, now obviously there was a lot more to record, but that's enough for now. When I'm done recording, I click the stop button up here, and then I can come in here and start cleaning stuff up. I can highlight all that extra tail that I don't need and hit the clear button, and I can or the delete button, and I can come in here to the beginning and I can highlight the stuff that I don't need. I'm just trimming. All this is just trimming. I highlight and hit delete, and voila, I now have this nicely recorded initial narration. Welcome back to the Joe Show, everyone. Today's episode. Okay, good enough. My next step then would be to import some music. Now, I had already located online. I went and searched, and there are tons of free music sites, and you kind of have to be careful because some of them will say, royalty free, which doesn't really mean they're free. You still have to pay for them. They just don't carry any royalty fees. But I'm using music that I know is safe for me to use, and I can always claim fair use via copyright to be safe from any type of litigation. As an educator, we do have a pretty liberal license. And you should remember that from your EDIT 604 class. Nevertheless, I need to import some music. I've already found it. I already downloaded it. How do I get it into Audacity? That's easy. File, import, audio, and then I have to navigate to it. In this case, it's an MP3 file, which is the most common type of audio file that you'll probably want to import. And I'll click open. By the way, if you try to use an M4A or the advanced audio codec from iTunes, Audacity will belch. It will not like that. There are some extra plugins that you can install in Audacity to make it understand that particular file format. But my advice is just to find a different file. It's usually a little bit easier. But if you want to read up on how to use a special encoder to import an M4A or AAC audio file, Audacity can do that, but you have to install a plugin for it. And again, you can search for that on your own. It's also in one of the links that I posted in the module. So with that said, this music is in here. It's too long. Look how long it is. Good grief, I don't need that much. So let me zoom out just a little bit. And I'm going to grab my selection tool and trim it down to say, I don't know, right about there. And I'm just going to cut that stuff out. Now, if I were to click play right now, all I would hear is nonsense because they're going to play at the same time. Do you see how they're stacked right on top of each other at time 0? The Joe Show, everyone. Today's episode. Okay, I can't really hear much besides music. The narration just kind of gets drowned out. So clearly I need to fix that. One of the first things I need to do, maybe, is to name this. And so I think I'm going to name this track, and I'm going to call it Music. And then this track up here, I'm going to call Narration. So now both tracks are named. Now let me get them in the right stacking order. I know, and again, there's no rule about this, but I know that I want it to go from top to bottom, pretty much. As the time moves from left to right, I want the assets to be arranged top to bottom. It just helps me understand visually what's going on. So I'm going to come down here to the music track and then simply move the track up. And now it's at the top. Next step, let's get everything to start up right. I want the narration to start somewhere around here as the music fades out. But right now, as you'll see, if I click my selection tool and click right about there, it's going to play and then the narration starts and I still can't hear anything. Welcome back to the Joe Show, everyone. Okay, it's all jumbled up there at this crossover point. So I want the music to fade out. How do I do that? Well, the easiest way is to simply highlight it, go to the effect tool. Good grief, look at all these effects. This is crazy. And choose fade out. And you can see what happens. The music fades out nicely and then the narration will start. So let's back up right about here, press play. Welcome back to the Joe Show, everyone. Today, okay, that's not bad. It really isn't. That sounds pretty good. But there may be times, I'm going to undo that. There may be times where you want the music to play for an extended period of time at a lower volume level, and you just want a little bit more precision. That's when you want to use the envelope tool. And what I like to do is to set 2 envelope points. the very end, and then somewhere about where the point where I want the music to stop or to start reducing. In other words, it starts to get quiet. And then here's the really tricky part. I've got a beginning and the end point. And if I take my mouse and I click and drag up from the bottom here at the very end, I can create a tail. I can move left to right to adjust how that tail is sloped. And eventually, by playing around trial and error, I get this nice curve in here in the volume level that will allow me then to take the shift tool and position my narration so that it sounds pretty good right about the point where the music stops being so loud. So I'm going to put it right about there, and I'll press play and let's see how this sounds. Welcome back to the Joe Show, Okay, and so that works pretty well. I promise you, you're going to pull your hair out trying to get used to this envelope tool. It may simply be easier for you just to highlight the segment of the audio that you want to have fade out, and then just go to the effect tool, and click fade out. That might be easier for you. Now let's talk about how to import other audio. More specifically, how to capture audio from other computer sources. So I'm going to switch over here to the finished file, and you know where I am by now. Here's my music up here in track 1. Here's the talk 1 file that we've already created and edited. And down here is this third audio file, this audio element that I've captured live from YouTube. And I want to show you how I did that. Now, I need to warn you ahead of time, this is a tricky technique and it may not work for everybody, but in theory, if you have your computer set up appropriately with the sound card, it's actually a pretty straightforward process. The first step is really simple. Cue up the audio. So in my case, I've got this particular code.org clip that I found on YouTube. This is from a TED Talk, and I queued it up already so that it's right at the point where I want to start recording. So all I would have to do is click on play and then switch back to Audacity and press record. It really is that simple. But to make it work, you have to switch from your microphone to whatever your audio card is. And most audio cards will have an option called stereo mix, meaning that Audacity will look at your sound card and record any system audio that's playing through that stereo mix. And if I've got it set up right in my sound control panel to play back using the audio card, then all I have to do is press play in YouTube and then come over here and press record in Audacity, and it will record. And it'll record in its own track, and then I can come down here and I can highlight it and trim out the stuff that I don't want, get rid of the silence at the end, and then come back up here in my shift tool and move it around so that it's positioned exactly where I want it to be. So that's how you capture audio from the system. It doesn't necessarily have to be YouTube. It can be any computer program or any application that has audio playing from it. The other way you can import a sound like this, of course, is to find an MP3 or a WAV file or an AIFF file that somebody else has already created and posted online, and you simply download it and go to the File Import Audio option here. So those are the two ways that we can import other audio that we want to use and insert into our timeline and position accordingly in whatever for whatever reason the composition requires. Another cool little trick that I want to show you here is crossfading. Crossfading in Audacity is a manual process, meaning I have to take my time shift tool and I have to get my two clips lined up the way I think they need to be timed, and then depending on the amount of audio artifacts that are in here, I may need to crossfade them to make them sound seamless. For example, let me play this right now. I'm going to click right here and press play.
Science.
So okay, that doesn't sound so bad really, but I can make it sound a little bit smoother simply by coming in here toward the tail end and highlighting it and going to the effect menu and choosing fade out. And then for this particular clip right here, I can highlight the exact same amount, then go to the effect menu and choose, and then choose fade in. And what I've done here is to create a crossfade. As this clip fades out, this clip fades in. And that way you start from absolute zero at the beginning of this clip, and you start from absolute zero, or you end with absolute zero in this clip, and they cross over in a manner that makes it impossible to perceive the differences in them. It becomes very, very seamless. So this is a great trick. All you do is highlight the end, fade this out, highlight this end, and fade that end in. That is a manual crossfade, and it's a very, very practical technique for cleaning up some of the abrupt changes when you import other audio, or when you just have a tough shift in the sound quality between the two different clips. One of the last cool things I want to show you here is how you can use Audacity to adjust the noise level, the background ambient noise in a recording. Take a look at this waveform here. I've blown it up, I've zoomed way in, and I've resized the track so it takes up almost the entire size of the screen. And I want you to look at this segment I'm pointing at right now. Do you see these little bumps right here? Not the big amplitude waveforms here, but these little fuzzy things right there. This is room noise, otherwise known as room tone. And even my microphone here, this is a Blue Yeti. It's a very, very good microphone. It's not going to have a whole lot of noise in here, but every now and then you might hear a car pass in the background just because of where my house is located. And sometimes the air conditioning kicks on, or sometimes the fan in the computer kicks on, and there's just a little bit of background hum. How do we get rid of that? Well, we do that by using a noise filter effect. And here's how that works. The first step, of course, is to choose your selection tool and highlight a section of noise. Now, this doesn't mean loud noise. If you try to train the Audacity on a really loud noise, it's probably going to impact the sound of your narration. What you're trying to do here is to reduce the ambient background noise. So the first step is to highlight some stuff that you know is just silence, but you can hear the ambient humming in the background. Your next step then is to go to the Effect menu and select the option called Noise Reduction. And it asks you, hey, get a noise profile. Well, you've already got it selected, so click Get Noise Profile, and you've done that now. It's selected. So now you can select the whole track, or you could select all tracks if you wanted, just by dragging and clicking, and then going back to Effect and choosing Noise Reduction, and then click OK. And when I click OK here, I want you to watch what happens to the little fuzzies right here. You click OK, and wow, they're gone. So visually on screen, I can see that I have taken out the ambient noise in the background. Now, because my microphone is so good, if I were to play both of these versions, you really wouldn't tell much of a difference. And the lesson there is, yeah, if you can afford it, get a good microphone. You know, this microphone cost $100, but I don't expect you to buy that for a homework assignment. But just know that, you know, the difference between your Walmart $10 headset mic and a $100 Blue Yeti microphone is pretty substantial. So how do you even the odds? Well, you even the odds using the noise reduction special effect. But you have to train it. You have to highlight a section of noise and then use that to establish the noise profile, and then apply that profile to the entire track or the entire composition, and everything will adjust accordingly. It's a fantastic application or functionality of Audacity. Okay, so let me zoom back out here, and now it's time finally to export this composition into its final file format. And I know for my needs, I want to export it as an MP3. So that's my goal, because MP3 compresses the audio level down to high quality. It still maintains high quality, but compresses it down to a very usable file size. So that's my goal. To do that, I'd simply go to the File menu and select Export Audio. In the Export Audio option, it's going to ask me what file name do I want, where do I want to put it. You know how to do that. I then have to choose the particular file format. Now, the default file format is going to be Windows Audio format for if you're on a Windows machine. And you can certainly do that. And if you have trouble with this process, just save it as a WAV file and upload it, and we'll be fine. But the better option is to save it as an MP3. Now here's where Audacity kind of shortchanges us. Watch what happens. I select MP3 and then I click Save. It says my tracks are going to mix down to 2 stereo channels. That's fine. That's normal. I click OK. It asks me for some metadata. I could type that information in if I wanted to, and then I'm just going to click OK. When I do that, well, actually, it's going to export for me. But the first time you do it, it's going to ask you, hey, where is the lame mp3 encoder.dll file? This is on Windows. And let me explain what that means. Lame is another software plugin that acts as the translator to MP3. And you have to download that separately from Audacity. And there's a download button in that little dialog. When you click Save, it'll say, hey, where's the lame encoder DLL? And then it'll have a button that says Download. Click on that button that says Download, go to the page and download it and install it. Just follow the directions. And then the last step, when you go back to the File and Export Media option, it's going to ask you, where is that file? And you simply have to remember where you put it. So to be safe, I'm going to put a copy of the lame encoder DLL file in the homework assignment, but you can also get it from that download button. Once you've done that, it's easy. You only have to do that one time. Again, Audacity is simply outsourcing the translation process to a plugin, and that plugin is called Lame. So that's all we're doing, is just kind of adding that capacity to Audacity, and it will remember it from henceforth. So you only have to do this one single time. And then when you're finished, of course, you should have on your desktop, let me minimize my screen here and see if I've done it correctly. There it is. Look, I created an MP3 file. I could now double click on this file and play it, and it would play in whatever my default audio player is. The last step, of course, after this is then to upload it for your homework assignment, which in our case is simply adding it as an attachment in Moodle. Piece of cake. If you wanted to publish for this for your own students to access, then you would put it in your own school's learning management system, whether that's Google Classroom or whatever. And if you wanted to take it a step further and you wanted your listeners to be able to have that sent to them automatically, then you would have to use a podcasting host service like iTunes. And that's another level of complexity. We're not going to go there. We talked about it in the module, but just know that that's your other option. And the key advantage there is your listeners get it downloaded for them automatically, so that all they have to do is launch their podcast player, whatever that is. It's more than likely iTunes, and it will be listed right there, ready to be played automatically. So that is our tutorial of Audacity, the audio editor. I can't tell you how exciting this program is. It's so much fun. There's a lot more to learn about it, but this is enough to be dangerous. You'll probably have questions, so please post them in the discussion forum. But I can't wait to see what kind of audio learning objects you create for this particular week's assignment. Don't forget, you don't have to do what I did. You can choose a totally different instructional design context, read the directions carefully, choose accordingly, and make something that you think is worth listening to. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time online.